Could a new year in Gaza bring peace? Further suffering marked the start of 2025, with dozens more Gazans killed and more hospitals leveled since January 1st. Newly started ceasefire talks are slowly inching forward in Doha, but few considered actual progress. So if negotiations don't succeed, how much longer can the destruction continue before Gaza is fully destroyed? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is Gaza. The initial shock of Israel's assault on Gaza has worn off, and sadly for Gazans, that's meant less attention paid to the almost total destruction of their land and people. Many have lost hope in peace talks, which, although relaunched, have produced little more than the possibility of a prisoner swap so far. Violence in the West Bank is also increasing, leaving all to question whether 2025 can bring peace or more war. Here's a look.
The injured and killed are rushed to hospital as Israel ramps up its devastating missile onslaught on Gaza. Attacks on hospitals, refugee camps and residential areas killed over 100 people this weekend alone. And while Israeli strikes intensify, ceasefire talks in Qatar have suddenly resumed after a 2-month break. On Monday, Hamas said it agreed to free 34 hostages presented by Israel as the first phase of an agreement. But it also reiterated its stance that any deal depends on a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza and a permanent ceasefire. For its part, Israel has denied the claims, saying it has not received any confirmation or comment by Hamas regarding the status of the hostages appearing on the list. Meanwhile, the US is still optimistic.
We very much want to bring this over the finish line in the next 2 weeks, the time that we have remaining. And we will work every minute of every day of those 2 weeks to try to get that to happen. If we don't get it across the finish line in the next 2 weeks, I'm confident that it will get to completion at some point, hopefully sooner rather than later.
But as time passes, more Palestinian lives are being lost. Gaza's health services are now nearing a total collapse. After raiding and burning the Kamal Adwan hospital in the Strip's north, Israel has ordered Al-Auda and Indonesian hospitals to evacuate. Those two have also been under repeated Israeli attacks. The WHO representative for the Palestinian territories describes the hospitals as battlegrounds, while the UN's human rights chief, Volker Turk, is calling for an independent investigation.
The protection of hospitals during warfare is paramount and must be respected by all sides at all times. The destruction of hospitals across Gaza goes beyond depriving Palestinians of their right to access adequate health care. Those hospitals provided sanctuary for thousands of people with nowhere else to go.
On top of that, harsh winter conditions are worsening the misery being suffered by Palestinians. This father, Yahya al-Batran, is mourning his 20-day-old baby who died from severe cold. The child is one of 8 babies to have died from hypothermia in the last few weeks. The family has been displaced twice and now live in a tent in Deir el-Balah without electricity, gas or heating.
I fled the bombing with my children to protect them from the bombing so that they would die from hunger and cold, from the cold.
An end to this suffering could come with a ceasefire. Hamas has previously agreed on a proposal that includes the exchange of Israeli captives and Palestinian prisoners, an extensive reconstruction plan, an end to the siege on the Strip, and an Israeli withdrawal. But Israel wants indefinite security control over Gaza. The ongoing talks have revived hopes, but it's still unclear whether they'll finally bring peace this time.
So will 2025 bring any better for Palestinians? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are, from Washington, President and CEO of Anera aid agency Sean Carroll. From Bethlehem, Palestinian scientist and author Mazin Qumsiyeh. And from London, Senior Consulting Fellow at Chatham House, Yossi Mekelberg. Thanks all so much for being with me. Sean, I know you just returned from Gaza recently, so tell me first what you saw. And do you see any, so-called silver linings in the landscape there, both politically as well as on the ground itself?
Very few silver linings. I'll give you a couple, but let me start with the overall impression. The situation was even worse than I imagined, and of course I imagined it would be very bad. I had not been for a year, so I knew it would be much worse than the previous December when I had gone. But I was startled coming through the southeast corner, Karam Shalom, Karam Abu Salam, and going through Rafah. Complete hellscape, devastated. No buildings still intact, no presence of people or livelihoods except for a few young boys and men, shabab, standing by the side of the road hoping they could grab something coming off of aid trucks. And then the Netzarim corridor, the split, the no-go land that Israel is fully occupying in between South and North Gaza, also complete hellscape, no life. We moved very slowly through that 8-kilometer square. It's now not just a strip, it's a large, big square chunk of the Gaza Strip. We moved through that. It took 30 minutes and saw no one. And then Gaza City was worse than I expected. And I wasn't able to see the north, Jabalia and Bet Lahia and Bet Hanun, which are completely devastated. So the situation is really, the destruction is hard to imagine. We're seeing the images, and that gives you a pretty good idea. And it's not that bad everywhere, but there was a lot more of that level of destruction than I had imagined.
And before you go on to the silver linings you mentioned, why had you not imagined worse? I mean, was it so bad before that you thought it just can't go lower than this? Or were you just being hopeful?
Yeah. Well, I think even if we see images on television, on social media, you're only seeing a snapshot. And to actually be there and move for kilometers through this hellscape and see just destroyed building after destroyed building after destroyed building, and many of them hit more than once. We're hearing reports now, and we saw it. And one of our staff, our lead emergency response coordinator, who's from Gaza City but has been living in the south since the beginning of the war, and this was his 10th trip up to the north, and he was affected and choked up by how much worse it had gotten since his previous trip, which had been 2 months ago. And the driver of our vehicle, also from Gaza City, was returning for the very first time, and he choked up and was teary. And I thought to myself, this is really hard to even imagine. Hard to imagine coming back to my hometown and seeing this level of destruction. So even though we all knew that is what we would see, I just think it really hits hard.
Okay, before we go on then to any of the potential opportunities or bright spots here, if I can call it that, Mazin, let me ask you if you believed that it could ever hit this kind of bottom, which we still might not be the lowest point, as we know. Were you expecting it from just the start of this year, supposed to be renewed hope for 2025, to hear especially what you've been hearing in the last week out of Gaza?
Well, I have many friends in Gaza, and it's really heartbreaking to hear their messages on social media and on phone calls, pleading with us, basically. There's no food, very little food in the areas that they are, especially in North Gaza, the friends that are in North Gaza. It's very hard sometimes to imagine, as mentioned by Sean, to imagine what you expect to see. For example, we did a study using remote sensing in Gaza for tree covers and greenhouses in Gaza. We mapped every one of the greenhouses. We mapped the tree fields, and we saw in North Gaza, for example, 94% of tree cover is already destroyed. This is an ecocide, not just a genocide. The greenhouses are mostly 94% in North Gaza of all trees have been uprooted intentionally by the Israeli army. They are destroying not only the people and the infrastructure built by people, but also tree cover, both planted domesticated trees like olives, almonds, figs, and so on, but also the wild trees in the area. So there's an ecocide that's devastating, and so many destructions of food production sources. Greenhouses in the North Gaza, there's only 2 or 3 greenhouses, 2 that are still intact fully and 1 that is partially intact, but the rest of the greenhouses in North Gaza are already completely destroyed. This is food production, of course. In South Gaza, it's still going to get worse. So as you pointed out, it'll be worse.
Okay. Yossi, let me come to you because at least, and I'm almost phrasing that as a question, at least ceasefire talks are restarting. Does that give you hope?
I think this is the only hope we have. Because if there are no negotiations, there are not over a ceasefire deal, then the kind of situation will only get worse. I think for all the evidence we hear and see, the situation in Gaza is catastrophic, and the daily death toll is just growing, and the suffering with that, and the byproduct is of not having a health service, functioning hospitals, enough food going on. Also, the complete breakdown of law order. Even when food is entering, then there are gangs that are taking over, capturing this. So the only hope we have is through negotiation, and we see, yes, the resumption of this. That delegations are going to Qatar, to Cairo, and start talking about, even today was published a list of 34 Israelis hostages that will be potentially released. So we see a mini momentum is building. Is it going to lead to a ceasefire? The question, is it going to happen before Donald Trump assumes power in the White House or after that? But I think we have now a window between now and the 20th of January, maybe immediately after that something can be done. And I think we all agree should be done.
Yeah. I mean, Yossi, though, if we are where we are now, can I ask if Israel, even if illegally, by committing war crimes that it's been accused of, is Israel getting what it wants? They've been able to hobble Hezbollah. They've watched Iran suffer now while it, sees that ally wounded and then loses Bashar al-Assad in Syria, while also being able to move further into the Golan Heights. Is all of this actually empowering Israel and the right wing?
The question is what the conclusion that Israel is going to reach out of all of this. If Israel always wants to live and to ensure security through military force, maybe some in the Israeli government will reach exactly this conclusion, that Hezbollah forces is reduced military capability. Iran was Hamas as a military force hardly exists. See what happens in Syria. It enabled Israel to almost decimate the Syrian military power and take some of the Golan Heights, the other side. They're occupied within Syria. But we have seen along the years, at the end of the day, if Israel doesn't reach diplomatic solution with its neighbor, it will never live in security and peace. What ensures Israel's security and end of war is when it signed peace agreement with Egypt, when it signed peace agreement with Jordan, when it normalized relations with other countries in the region. During the Oslo years, it created hope, and with this even security cooperation between the PA in Israel. What it achieves now, if it's not translated into the diplomatic sphere, it will, at the end of the day, will end in more violence in the future.
Okay. Let me come back to Sean and let you now, if you can, begin to talk about whatever silver linings you did see in Gaza, especially, if there is hope through restarting negotiations of some sort, or if you saw something in the physical landscape that made you feel that things at some point can get better.
Yeah, well, You know, obviously the negotiations on a ceasefire and, even more important, long-term peace deal, end to the occupation, that's what's absolutely critical. I mean, Professor Mekelberg and Professor Mazin, congratulations on your Nobel Peace Prize nomination. Very exciting news. That's what we have to see. And what worries me the most is we see nothing on the horizon, at least from those who are making policy in Israel. And there are plenty of Israelis and people around the world who support Israel, who know that, in fact, the way this war is being prosecuted is not bringing more peace and security to Israel, and is not bringing hope. Yossi mentioned the Camp David Accords and the peace deals with Jordan and Egypt. It's true that that's what we need to look for. I have to say that as a humanitarian that's been working on, exclusively focused really on humanitarian aid, it's been disappointing how difficult it is, even for the Egyptians and the Jordanians, who have a long-standing peace treaty and good relations with Israel, to get aid in. I mean, we're struggling all the time. The border with Egypt at Rafah has been closed since May 6th. It's very difficult to get aid in from Egypt and even from Jordan. And I met with King Abdullah recently, talking about trying to get an air bridge of constant aid coming in via helicopter, and he still doesn't have full approval to do that. So we need the talks and negotiations on a ceasefire and a peace deal, but what we really need is for Israel, Israelis, and those who care about Israel, and I knew Israel and Israelis long before I knew Palestine and Palestinians. This is not the way to build peace and security for anybody in the region. Now, on the question of some bright spots, and we can't call it a silver lining, but perhaps some bright spots, I saw constant movement, mostly people just trying to survive, but also some Palestinians working on repair, working on rebuilding. I saw a small municipal crew actually removing rubble from a street so that they could repair a water main line that would serve 15,000 people. This was in the Nusrat Burej area. I saw a small warehouse being built. We saw a new sweet shop in Gaza City in Rimal neighborhood where our office is. And Anera has been in the same office for 40 years in Gaza. We've been working there for 50, but in the same office for 40 years. And our staff are back in that office. So that's hopeful. We saw some kids beginning to go back to school. Anera is running temporary learning centers, and we've been since early in the war, we've been running psychosocial activities, fun and games for kids. And I saw all this work, and I saw our health clinics, and I saw our food delivery. We've delivered over 58 million meals. So aid is coming in. We are delivering it, but we can talk about the numbers. We're really only at about a third at best, a quarter to a third of what's needed.
Okay. Mazin, I mean, first of all, their determination and resolve is more than admirable, to say the least. Mazin, I could see you'd been waiting to get in. Do go ahead.
What I observe, I mean, one of the problems that we see repeatedly is that there's a misdiagnosis of what's going on here. What we have is a colonial settler expansionist state that has been doing this for 76 years. This is not a problem of Gaza. This is not a problem with the West Bank. This is an expansionist displacement settler colonialism, similar to what happened in Australia with the British occupation, colonization of Australia, or of the United States, what happened to create the United States. Ben Gurion himself said, we are like the Europeans in North America. We can negotiate, we can make deals with some tribes in North America. That's what the Europeans did. And here we can also make deals, but when we are strong enough, we can break any deals and we can expand to whatever areas that we want to. And you can already see this empire is being built. Israel is already expanded into southern Syria, not just the Golan Heights, but southern Syria to the Yarmouk areas of Jordan, basically occupying those areas, and they want to connect to the Kurdish areas in northern Iraq. Israel is building an empire, has been building an empire since its foundation, and will continue to do this. These interim agreements I make with countries like Jordan or Egypt are not a solution. They're actually a tool of achieving the empire. The empire is at the expense of the indigenous people. 8.5 million of us are refugees or displaced people, now increased because of Gaza, and it will increase into other areas like Syria and Jordan and South Lebanon, which you already see. So what we need to do is rethink our modus operandi. This is not about making peace deals or making exchanges of some prisoners. There are 25,000 Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. They are being tortured to death. 70 already were killed by torture. So we need to talk about those kinds of things, the struggle between indigenous people and a colonial power and what's happening.
Well, let me ask Yossi if you think there's any possibility that those, and we've heard all those historical comparisons and the descriptions said many times before, but it doesn't seem like that will ever be addressed in negotiations. What is being negotiated is the here and now. Israel wants to destroy Hamas. It doesn't believe, Hamas should ever have existed in the first place. It's nothing but this, group that will not recognize the existence of Israel. So I don't know, we're back to start, point A again. How do you ever get to a place where negotiations can properly begin if too many Palestinians in particular do believe that the foundations cannot be accepted?
I think first, it's not helpful when someone sees the entire Jewish population in Israel as colonialists, as imperialists, in other ways that they don't belong. This is also not a good starting point. There is a conflict between two people, and I think the discourse right now in Israel is toxic, and the people in power in Israel are not conducive to any peace agreement. Yes, they want to annex the West Bank. They probably want to annex also Gaza and build their settlements. And they must take deep thinking within Israel to change this discourse. Israel needs election to bring a new government, but not only new government, a new thinking about its relations with the Palestinians and with the region, one that actually more conducive to diplomatic solution and not only to military solution, and build this kind of changing with the security paradigm that I think really almost ruined the discourse in Israel and its ability to live in peace with its neighbors. And also there need to change also within the Palestinian political discourse and political system. And then we can move on. We need the international community to be proactive and put both sides to task and say that there is no other solution than a two-state solution in which everyone that lives, whether it's Israelis and Palestinians, have the same political, human, and civil rights. And then we can move on. Unfortunately, we are not there yet. But the fair thing is a ceasefire, humanitarian aid to Gaza, the return of the hostages, and then start from rebuilding from that. But this will also need the deep changes, profound changes in the Israeli, also the Palestinian society, but also international community that doesn't lose the attention on this conflict.
Yeah, so Sean, very quickly, Yossi says we're not there yet. Having seen what you've seen just recently in Gaza, if they don't get there soon, can Gaza even survive?
Look, I often say, people say it's complicated, and I say it's not so complicated. There's an occupation and there's a resistance. But the real issue, Yossi pointed out, this is an issue between two people. The real issue is the decision makers in Israel are not treating Palestinians as people. I'm afraid that is really at the heart of this. The dehumanization of the Palestinian people is something I've felt and known for a while, but the depth of it and the breadth of it, frankly, and absolutely, Yossi, it's one should never paint the entire Israeli population, and certainly not any portion of the Jewish population as being on the wrong side of history on this. But the decision makers right now are not treating Palestinians as fellow human beings, and that is at the root of the problem right now. And I saw that, and when I see the humanity that does exist, the solidarity to try to help keep one another alive, the families that are taking care of orphans who have no family members left, the community spirit to keep going, which I've just witnessed last month. The humanity is as strong as any I've seen anywhere. So the dehumanization of Palestinians is such a stark contrast to the actual humanity that exists, and that's what we need to focus on.
Well, let's hope that humanity can prevail. Mazin, I am so sorry. So unfortunately, we're completely out of time for this edition of the Newsmakers, so I'd like to thank all three of you sincerely so much for being with us. Our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.